Hello, you're watching the Nouvel Esprit video series on the theology of the body. In this video, we begin chapter 2 of part 1. And in particular, we are dedicating this video to the 24th audience. We are your hosts. I am Jeremy Hossotter.
And I'm Guillermo Moreno.
So to dive into a new chapter. So the theology of body, just rather briefly, is broken up into 2 parts. Each part has 3 chapters. And so we are now in chapter 2 of the first part. So chapter 2, we begin with some text from the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount, how would you describe the Sermon on the Mount, Guillermo?
The Sermon on the Mount, it's I don't want to call it a monologue. It's certainly not a monologue. But it's an instance in which Christ is preaching to his followers. And the allusion is he's just taking the role of the new Moses. So what he tells us here in the Sermon on the Mount, something we hear from him often is, you have heard that it was said, thou shalt not kill, for example. But and then he says, but I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother is and I'm going to botch his words, but he's essentially alluding to the old law, the laws of the old covenant, and he's building off of the meaning behind them. So right here in the Sermon on the Mount, he's really preaching the transformation of our hearts, so that just I don't know if hyperbolically speaking is the right way to put it, but to the point where we wouldn't need the law. And that's just one example that I wanted to give. And the reason why is because Moses received, the reason why he's doing this talk on a mount, referring to the old law and then building on it by describing the meaning behind it, and speaking in the imperative, telling his followers to do what he says. The reason why is because Moses received the 10 commandments on Mount Sinai. So Christ is giving us basically the new law in this mount in Matthew chapters 5 through 7. But real quick, Matthew 5:27 through 28 is what specifically refers to his appeal to the heart, which the rest of the audiences in this chapter will shed light on.
Yeah, thank you, Guillermo, for that wonderful
explanation
of the Sermon on the Mount. I've heard it described before that the Sermon on the Mount is like the Magna Carta for the Christian moral life, because as you talked about, it is Christ's words here are a fundamental revision of how we are to understand morality, with this emphasis now on the heart, the inner dimension. We get caught up in kind of a legalism. And these are themes that JP2 is going to be bringing up in this audience. So to get us in the frame of the text here of audience 24, essentially what JP2 is doing here is beginning like what he did in the very first audience. In the first audience, we had that text of Matthew 19, which JP2 introduced what the Christ words to the Pharisees concerning divorce and the appeal to the beginning. Now we could pretty much say that this text here, Matthew 5, is an appeal to the heart now. And the appeal to the heart only makes sense if we go back to the beginning. So let me read the two verses of Matthew 5 that we are focusing on for this
Hmm.
chapter. Quote, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you, whoever looks at a woman to desire her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." End quote. This is the text we are focusing on. What do we mean when we say desire and adultery in the heart just by looking? Now, the text of Matthew 5 here, these two verses, are going to be a fundamental revision in how we understand three commandments of the Old Covenant. From Moses' 10 commandments, we learned the fifth commandment, sixth, and eighth, not that ye shall not kill, commit adultery, or swear falsely. And Christ here is uniting these to bring us to kind of inner, I guess, the inner meaning that we have to discover and embrace with our hearts. And so Matthew 5, this text here, in addition to Matthew 19, contains explicit normative content. That means it contains moral laws that you are obligated to follow in order to become good. And in becoming good, you fulfill your human nature as being made in the image and likeness of God, as fulfilling that original vision of God, a creature willed for his own sake. And so Matthew 5 is going to confirm the meaning of the commandments and give them their full meaning. And this fulfillment has two aspects. It's first a question of adhering to God's meaning, and second, it is the fulfilling of justice that man is called to, that is demanded upon him as a moral duty, as a moral norm. And as Guillermo has brought up, the Sermon on the Mount, we can really say is the heart or the form of human ethos. And a very important point here that what JP2 wants to drive home is that the moral life is not just norms alone. Yes, there are norms. Like, yes, you cannot commit adultery. Yes, you cannot contracept. Yes, you cannot steal. Yes, you cannot lie. But if you just live in the contours of norms alone, you are not really living a moral life. This living ethos that JP2 wants to bring to our attention has existential meaning. And the term existential, if we refer to the Oxford Dictionary here, it means concerned with existence or relating to existence. The existential meaning of this living ethos is us living out existentially, living out our existence, these norms in their inner dynamism within our heart. These norms must be lived in our lives. Did you have anything like to add, Guillermo, to these slides?
Yes, I will be just jumping the gun a little bit, but it just really seems like, no, it is the fact that I was gonna say Christ's interlocutors, but I think our fallen humanity acknowledges, yeah, there's right and wrong. Like, and well, where's the checklist? What do we have to do to not go to hell? And there's, as you said, there are norms, but morality, it's something, I think ours is a legalistic paradigm. As long as I'm not doing the wrong thing, oh, I'm good, right? And part of the problem is, what do we try to do? Look for loopholes. which, as we'll see in these later audiences, that's precisely what was going on in the old covenant. And that's why Christ says, but in the beginning it wasn't so. Look, your hardness of heart, this, and and so forth.
Yeah, thank you, Guillermo, for that. I appreciate how you connected that with the idea or the concept of kind of a legalism, or we
Yes.
could say a Pharisaism,
You
right?
know, I want to believe that there's a distinction between legalism and Pharisaism, because I think Pharisaism is more about liturgical correctness, which is valid. It's like as norms, yeah. The liturgy has its structure, it's there for a purpose, but we get too stuck on the side of the structure rather than the meaning behind it.
Yeah,
Similarly with legalism, like, oh,
yeah,
well, I didn't break this law, therefore I'm good. But no, but you're
yeah,
in your heart, basically, your heart was in the wrong place when the act that you did, okay, did it break this law? No, but what you did was consistent with what the law is trying to prevent, which is wrong.
yeah. So if I understand you correctly, you're saying the same thing, but with different applications.
I believe
A
so.
legalism in terms of
Yes.
morality versus a legalism in terms of liturgy. That's how you want to make the distinction.
When you mentioned Pharisaic, that was the analogy that came to mind. Oh, the
Okay.
Pharisees, they were just following the rules,
Right.
whereas the average Jews, they were just looking for the checklist of how do we avoid hell. I
Okay.
just I just I think, or I see a
But
distinction between
okay.
those two things.
Okay. Yeah. Though to be clear, I don't know if the Jews actually had a concept of hell before Christ. They had Sheol.
Well, and then okay,
Yeah.
building
But
off of
it's the same
okay,
idea,
yes,
sort
no,
of.
I agree, because the
Similar.
rich young man,
Yeah.
because the rich young man says, "What good must I do to inherit eternal life?" Like,
Right.
okay, where's the checklist? And I'll do
Yeah.
it.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay,
Exactly.
you're right. You're right. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah. No,
I
I
You're
appreciate
right.
your comments on
Oh, thank
this.
you.
Yeah. I think that's helps bring to light kind of the world ethos of what we're grappling with in terms of original sin and fallen humanity, is that in general we just have this tendency towards a legalism, whether
Hmm.
it's morality or liturgy.
Yes, and a little off topic, but I would I would I would use traditionalists as analogous to the Pharisees or Pharisaism.
Well, I would be careful of that too.
Yeah,
Some brands of traditionalism.
let's say, because radical traditionalism, that's a whole other can of worms.
Right. I mean, in one respect, we are very traditionalist in that we do reject
You're right. No,
a lot
so
of
yeah, of
things
course,
like transgenderism.
but we don't think that the traditional Latin Mass is um that is the answer in and of itself.
Sure.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's what I meant.
That's fair. All right. Coming back. All right. Nothing more on normativity.
No.
Okay. Let's move on then. So here is a paragraph that I believe we should spend some time to decipher because there is actually a lot going on in here and it looks a little complicated. So let's go ahead and read this together. Begin quote. The morality in which the very meaning of being human is realized, which is at the same time the fulfillment of the law by the superabounding of justice through subjective vitality, is formed in the interior perception of values, from which duty is born as an expression of conscience, as an answer of one's own personal I. Ethos makes us, at one and the same time, enter into the depth of the norm itself and descend into the interior of man, the subject of morality. Moral value is connected with the dynamic process of man's innermost being. To reach it, it is not enough to stop on the surface of human actions, but one must penetrate precisely the interior. End quote. This is from TOB 24, paragraph 3. So I was thinking about how to summarize this, and because it does sound a little bit convoluted what is going on. So I thought it'd probably be better if we just work through this paragraph together. So the morality that we're talking about where human is realized, right? So we're looking at something in terms of fulfillment of the law. And when this law is fulfilled, we experience a superabounding of justice. There's an overflowing. Now, this morality that has these conditions, it's formed precisely in the interior perception of values. So this right here is one of the key elements of the text. You, you essentially cannot realize and fulfill the moral law and have this overflowing justice if you are unable to perceive values. Value perception is foundational, fundamental, if you are going to become a moral person. And this perception of values then leads to the duty. So through our perception of values, we encounter duty. And this duty is found in our conscience. And so when we perceive values and experience this duty to act according to values, we give an answer of our own I. It is from our heart that we respond to values, that we give a value response. And that act is something that comes from the heart of man. It is from the heart of man that we can fulfill the law. And by responding to values with one's heart, you're giving your own personal I as an assent to those values. And in doing this, you fulfill your meaning of being a human being, as being a human person. You realize the meaning of personhood. And so when that is all accomplished, we can point out this phrase of subjective vitality. So vitality is talking about life, right? You have this thriving life. It's vital. Subjective, it's referring to the inner life of the human person. When you realize this moral life by carrying out your duty, once you perceive values by living according to your conscience, there is a experience of yourself where you recognize a living vitality. You think about the character of John Paul II, there's a living a vitality about his personality, something that entrances people, captivates them, just because of the how humble and virtuous his life was. When you look at the lives of the saints, there's something unique about their lives that sets them apart. And it's precisely this superabounding of justice, this fulfillment of our human nature, of our personhood, by living out a moral life according to the vision of God. And keep in mind, that's just the first sentence. So the moral life requires this interior perception of values. And with that in mind, we can look at now the second part. This perception and duty allows us to enter into the norms themselves. So when we perceive values and we give our personal I as an assent to these values by saying yes to the duty, right? We enter into the depth of these values, right? You give your response to these values, and in this way, you're making them your own. You're acting in this way consistent with them. And so these values become part of how you live. And so when you enter into the depth of the norm itself, and the values descend into man's interior. And here we note that the interior of man, or we could say the heart of man, that is the subject of morality. It's the human heart that's the subject. If you just live according to exterior actions alone, it's like, well, I never said a lie. That doesn't mean in your heart that you have lived morally, because your interior can still be corrupted. I'm thinking actually of a episode of House that my wife and I just watched in season 5. You have this guy that has this disease, and it makes him say whatever's on his mind at that moment. And so he says these very terrible things to a couple ladies that he just wants to have sex with them. Did he actually live a moral life if he had these thoughts about wanting to have sex with other people, even though he's married and never actually carries that out? It is precisely this type of problem that we are addressing by going back and looking at the interior dimension of man, by looking at the heart of man. And this is why JP2 says it's not enough to stop on the surface of human actions, but we have to penetrate the interior. You have to go to the heart of man. Now, some of the themes here, if you're interested in learning more about this kind of about value response and kind of this subjective approach to morality. And by subjective, I don't mean as in its morality is relegated to just like it's defined in terms of man, like we make our own moral meaning. No. What is meant here is we can think of the appropriation of moral values and norms by the human subject such that he lives out those norms in his life. And this emphasis is found within phenomenology. And in fact, JP2 refers to Max Scheler, who's a German philosopher, a realist. He belongs to the branch of phenomenology. That's a realist. And just a side note, JP2 wrote his habilitation thesis on Max Scheler's ethical theory. So Max Scheler would be one source to look at kind of this phenomenology of the moral life and values, though Max Scheler does have some deficiencies in his ethical analysis. Another great um, philosopher to look at is Dietrich von Hildebrand. In particular, I'm thinking of his books, The Art of Living and Ethics, both of which have been recently retranslated into English and published by the Hildebrand Legacy Project. Guillermo,
Yes,
did you have anything you'd like to add to our paragraph here?
not quite. I just
Okay.
wanted to ask if there's a little off topic, but if there's a good introduction book on phenomenology, if you would recommend it, please.
Um, you know, offhand, like if you want to look at the movement overall, I know Dermot Moran has a book on phenomenology. If you want to go into kind of a overview of different branches. Um, though that book doesn't really go into a lot of the early realist school as much. It goes into more of the some of the crazies, such as Martin Heidegger. Um, let's see. I'll open the book and look at who else. Yeah, Jean-Paul Sartre, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, others. It does not really go into some of these other thinkers that were the realist school, like Max Scheler and Dietrich von Hildebrand.
Great.
Um, yeah, if you're looking for I would highly recommend Dietrich von Hildebrand if you want to study some phenomenology, just because of the way he does it. He's Catholic, faithful to the magisterium, while trying to bring new insights to the things themselves. Um, his book on virtues, Transformation in Christ, I found to be quite invaluable.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. All right, let's clear this mess. We'll continue on. All right. So as we've talked about before, there's a revision in our moral understanding that Christ is doing in Matthew 5. In particular, we have Christ, he's connecting the commandments of not desiring one's wife with not committing adultery. And these are connected further with the dimension of interior action, the heart of man that is made visible with the physical actions of the body. So the Old Testament focused more so on the exterior conditions of these sins, and this led to some legal loopholes, which, when you focus on the exterior, this invites legalism. And when you have this legalistic attitude, you start looking for loopholes. And when you look for the loopholes, this leads to a compromise of the moral life. And the more you compromise the moral life, the more you search for these loopholes, that contributes to a hardening of the heart. So these processes of compromising and hardening of the heart led to a deformation in understanding the moral law while promoting the legalistic attitude even more. Christ now wants to shift the essence of morality back to the inner dimension of the heart, and he appeals to this dimension. Whoever looks at a woman to desire her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, the translation JP2 draws our attention to. The first one's what you typically read, and then we have the second one, quote, has already made her an adulteress in his heart, end quote. And JB2 notes that this second translation, where you have this desire that makes the woman an adulteress, it's not just simply committing adultery, but already made her an adulteress in his heart, appears to be more faithful to the older translations, the Greek and the Latin of this verse. There's an interesting couple footnotes on this concerning the translations, if you wanted to dive into that. Guillermo, did you have anything you'd like to add before we finish our video?
I do not.
All right. In that case, thank you for watching our video. If you have been enjoying our content, please subscribe to our social media, such as our YouTube channel, and consider making a financial donation. You can make such a donation through either PayPal or by supporting us on Patreon. And the funds that you donate to us are used for maintaining the website and for the purchase of materials in order to continue giving you great research. On our website, you can find all sorts of articles and also our podcast. Guillermo, do you have anything more you'd like to add about the podcast?
Yes, we upload our Le Nouvel Esprit podcast episodes on buzzsprout.com. You can find the link to Buzzsprout on the Le Nouvel Esprit website, and it'll take you to the list of episodes. You'll find them all there. You can listen to them on Buzzsprout itself, or you can listen to them on any of the platforms in which we are listed, including many of the mainstream platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. And in that series, we talk about a diverse amount of topics, usually on cultural trends, political trends, etc., always through a lens of Catholic personalism.
Our goal with the podcast is about 2 episodes a month, right, Guillermo?
Yep.
All right. So about 2 episodes a month. They tend to be quite lengthy, about hour and a half. With that, you can find all of our social media at lenovelesprit.com/subscribe. Any last things, Guillermo, before we end our video?
I would just like to ask our viewers and listeners to keep us and our mission in our prayers.
Yes, please continue praying for us. We appreciate all your prayer and support, even if it's something as simple as liking our content or sharing it with a friend. Thank you for watching our video.
God bless everyone.